Now then, first thing is just a bit of background, if I may. You started off your kind of career, if I can put it that way, studying a fairly traditional discipline, archaeology and anthropology, I believe.
Yeah.
What drove you to do that?
Well, on one hand, I wasn't really certain what I was going to do when I grew up, and I knew I came from a family of doctors, and I didn't want to be a medic. I didn't want to be a lawyer because they seem to work incredibly hard at university. So I decided, and I got some advice from my grandfather, who was a significant politician and businessman in England, my godfather, and he said, ensure that you are able to understand financial information. So I decided I was going to then go into the accountancy profession. So I just, there is no qualification you can do at a university that reduces the amount of time, so I ended up studying archaeology and anthropology.
Okay, so you were thinking about the financial world, and archaeology was the obvious route into. I think it's genius.
Well, to show you how appalling it was, I actually spelled archaeology wrong on my application. But I managed to blag myself through the interview because they wanted a footballer.
So the process then of becoming an accountant means that you then go from university after you've graduated to work with a firm and go through like an apprenticeship?
Yes, you do. You do 3 years, and I trained with what is now Ernst & Young in London. You do 3 years, and effectively, in return for you working for slave labour wages, they pay for your professional education.
Okay.
And then after 3 years, you qualify, and then you can be a professional accountant if you want to be.
Just to explore before we go into your business career, what did you see within that intensive 3-year period that put you off accountancy on its own and turned you on to thinking about business?
I didn't enjoy the environment. I didn't enjoy the going in, looking, touching, or a business, but not having any emotion invested or any stake in it.
Yeah.
It was. I found it very dry, and I didn't like that. You flit in, you do your work, you flit out again.
Yeah.
A and B. I'm not. I felt. You're in an abstracted world. You're not really, you think you understand really what about business, but as I said to the group earlier, as soon as I had qualified and I joined a client of Ernst & Young, on day one I realised I knew absolutely nothing about the real world of running a company and just dealing with the day-to-day problems you get in a business. So I think it was the right step.
Did you move into a financial role, or was it more of an operational role?
I joined a small software company which did airline reservations and stock exchange trading systems based in south of England, and I joined as financial controller. But you immediately, in all of these things, the person on the finance side, if there's any gap, you tend to be especially in small businesses, you tend to pick up everything that no one else is doing.
Yeah.
So you inherently migrate into other areas.
And how many people were in that small business, roughly?
Probably about 30, 35.
So small enough for you to move between activities and learn the trade, the craft, as it were?
Well, it's yes. I mean, one of the things I used to get involved with always was they asked me to beta test any of the software they were writing, because I seem to have a knack of breaking everything. Which hasn't changed. But that's the enjoyment of being in a small company. Yeah. And actually, I suspect one of the reasons I'm also moved out of the profession was because I was working for Ernst & Young. I was a very, very small cog in a very, very large field. Yeah. And there's something fantastic about being involved in a startup business and seeing it grow. It's very exciting.
How old was the company when you joined it, this first one?
About 3 or 4 years.
Okay, so still very early stages.
Very early stages.
Yeah. And from that, did you then sort of fall in love with the idea of starting a business, or did you have, like Phil talks about inventerprise, where you do something because something's happened, or inventerprise, where the business starts because you've come up with an idea. Which was the way that took you into starting the business with your friends?
It was just, I was at this software company for about 2 years, and it was owned a third by the 3 directors. Right. And I didn't see any opportunity for doing anything more than what I was doing. You're also quite, you're in your early 20s and you believe you can do anything. So
yeah, it's when you know you're immortal.
Yes.
Yeah.
With absolute certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. So, was it something that you and your 2 friends had discussed before, or was it a chance encounter? How much?
I answered. A friend of mine who, at my employment at the software company, who knew I was thinking about leaving, came along and handed me an advert, I answered the advert, and I went and met initially James, who has been a lifelong friend since that was back in 1986. I met Kevin as well, and I met the financier of this new startup, who was this Austrian count, who was a friend of a friend to James. And really, I got on really well with James and Kevin. The Austrian count is also a very good friend now. Wasn't so certain about me at the beginning, but it was quite interesting because in the early stages, we had an idea of what we were going to do. Yeah. James and Kevin had a similar business. James is younger than me, and he left school early. And that company had done really well and gone bang. It had overtraded, no control. No idea about how much money it was making, no cash flow control at all, and it had just gone bang. And so they knew that the importance of financial control. And then I think what was really also, as we started beginning to build up, put the company bits together to start trading, it then became very apparent as well that one of the keys was going to be things like operational efficiency, and using the new technologies which were available in the mid-80s of Unix multi-user systems.
Indeed. It's quite interesting to hear the way you talk, because you haven't yet talked about what it was you were selling or the technology, but there's a sense here that you and your colleagues felt you could work together to do something, and you had like a shared vision about financial control, about things, and you haven't yet come to actually say what the company was. Is that a really important part, that chemistry between people?
Chemistry is incredibly important.
Right.
It is having people with different skill sets who gel. I think if one is standing on the outside doing an assessment of a company as to whether or not you're going to invest in that business, one of the key things you have to spend time is working out the dynamics of the business,
Yeah.
and how effective the management team is, and how, because one of the, if everyone is sharing, there are a couple of important points. One, if everyone is sharing and feels confident that they can talk about things, you tend to create an environment where people say there's a problem rather than hiding it from you,
Yeah.
which is incredibly important. And if the chemistry between the three of you is really good, then you can say anything you want. You know you're not going to upset it because the person knows that you're saying with A as a friend and B, we're all in this together.
Yes. The point I was going to draw upon really is this idea. I did pick up on what you said. When you've got this team that gels together of people with different skills,
Yeah.
so the team has to be the right bits of the jigsaw.
Correct.
And you started with 3 people. I mean, does that help define what the starting 3 components have to be, or what would you say, looking back, are the key ingredients for the management team in terms of splitting out responsibility?
Well, James, he was chief executive. He took the title of chief executive. I took the title initially of chief financial officer, and Kevin was sales director. But actually, 3 more different personalities would be hard to find.
Right.
James is he had been wheeling and dealing effectively IT equipment since he was 17 years of age. He'd previously done 2-3 years at Xerox. But he has a natural understanding of the importance of brand, marketing, PR, message, and a deep commitment to research about what is happening in the market. Right? You could not meet someone who does more late nights, every single information source he can get his hands on, or for anything he's about to do, he will do research. He will research the market. He'll get an idea as to the dynamics, the key players, who's moving, whatever. Kevin is a hard-nosed salesman. He knows what, but our view, he was also responsible for procurement. So he knew what you need. Basically, in his mind, he could calculate immediately what the margin, what the profit is likely to be, and he was very good at communicating that and build a team of people like-minded around him. And basically, apart from that, I picked up sort of everything else.
Yeah.
And I remembered the second point, which is a very important point. One of the benefits of having 2 or 3 people running a business is that it means that if you're in a meeting and a decision needs to be made in that meeting, and it's an important meeting, and there's only one of you, and a supplier or someone is putting pressure upon you to make a decision, you're able to say, we have a policy in the organisation, we don't make important decisions without checking it with our friends first. It completely depresses the situation, and I thoroughly recommend it as a negotiating technique.
So we've got then the starting point of a management team, complementary skills. A person, very interestingly for us, the things that the current cohort and we've talked to alumni from the past, has been this commitment to research, the commitment to sorting out key messages, the commitment to communication, having a brand, all of those things. And if I can just turn my face that way, so this is the real life version of what we've been teaching you, and it's actually real. It's not an opinion, it's what works. So really important to hear those things. And the clarity with which you're speaking about the sales director, Kevin, who was looking to strike deals in purchasing and selling and being very clear about margins where you were, and the financial control, which is those of you who are students or alumni, financial control is like Phil Ragg but without the violence, if you get it. But all of these things together are prerequisites, could I say, Simon, for any business, any successful business?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Now, from that team then, and because of what was emerging at the time, you chose to go into computers, and Ideal Hardware was the name of the company. So what was the thing that you thought you'd be selling at the beginning, and what were you actually selling a bit later because things had changed or whatever?
Well, we started off in the late 80s. The IT market was beginning to gain real momentum, and one of the fundamental changes was the IT market. Up until that time, you'd had manufacturers of product, and most of them still had direct sales forces. And when people bought a computer, they bought a complete computer. The end of the 80s was when the concept of having reseller channels, where people would open the lids of these things and put in upgrades like memory cards, additional storage, additional memory, change the monitor, modems, all this stuff. So almost over about 2-3 year period, you got in the UK the creation of computer distributors and peripheral distributors, and you got resellers, loads of them, sole traders all the way to fully listed companies like Computer Centre.
Yeah.
And so the only thing we knew is we wanted to be a distributor, and we wanted to sell to the reseller community. That's how we started. And problem number one, apart from all the issues of raising money and starting and employing people, was what product were we going to sell? Yeah. So we had no name, no nothing. So what we had to do was anyone who had any product that they wanted to sell, sort of on the secondary market, we would get. And it took us, and we were appalling at it in terms of we didn't make any money for a while, and just trying to get something to get our teeth into to get momentum going. James started saying, I think we need to focus and specialise on data storage. It's clearly going to be the thing of the future. You have to remember, the entry-level data storage device in those days was a thing called a 5 1/4 inch disk drive of 20 megabytes. And this thing, if you bought it straight off digital equipment to upgrade your digital computer, a man in a white coat with white gloves would arrive at your office to install this upgrade and probably charge you £500 for it. So what we were looking for, our plan, our goal was to become the sort of #1 distributor of data storage devices to the secondary market. People were beginning to buy clones, IBM clones manufactured in Taiwan, and so all of a sudden this market was burgeoning. But our fundamental problem we had at the time was we didn't know who. We needed to have a direct relationship with the manufacturer, and that was really difficult.
Okay, so keynote I think here is what we said before, that entrepreneur doesn't mean what most people think. It's from the French, entrepreneur, in between taker. And so the business model that you were coming up with here is not building your own things from scratch, but taking what was available and building a market around an opportunity that you saw.
Yes.
So this is a team that is an entrepreneur team by definition, the French definition as a consequence of that. So how long did it take you to find the suppliers of what you wanted to sell and form the relationships that allowed you to grow?
Well, in the first full year was 1987, and we were in a domestic sort of large house which belonged to our Austrian Count investor in Mayfair in London, central London, and our revenue in the first year was £4.7 million, and with an average deal value of probably £300-400. But we made absolutely no money whatsoever. we had, and we were consuming cash. Second year, I think we did 7.2. Again, but what happened in the third year was we managed to actually have a direct relationship with the manufacturer.
Right.
And that was one of the lights going on. And the second thing was happening that we actually worked out. It took us about 3 years to work out how to make money.
Yeah.
And then that third, fourth year is when we started thinking, right, now we know what we need to do, how to run this business in order to make money.
So I think one of the key points here is that making the best part of 5 million in year one, most people would say, wow, fantastic. And Simon describes it as we were hopeless at making money. Because we're talking about the margin, the profit, the money that you've got left, not just about the turnover, the sales, it's about the money that you've got left, profit being so critical. And that built in year two, and then year three, and to be able to do that, you needed a supply of stuff you could really begin to motor with.
Yes.
So how did you then tackle that challenge? How did you go about promoting what you had to people? Because in those days, they may not have really realised they would need data storage in the future. Did you have to do a lot of education of potential customers?
No, it was, this was a question of getting ready to surf a big wave.
Oh, yeah.
And James had seen the wave before other people.
Right.
So the key was to project the organisation in such a way that we attracted the suppliers.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they talk about business, they believe their customers are the people they sell to.
Yeah.
Sometimes your customer is the person you're buying off, because because you've got to do a good job for them, otherwise they're not going to sell for you. And so you need to invest sometimes as much time and effort up the channel as you do down the channel. Kevin was magnificent at entertaining the suppliers and taking them out. He could outdrink anybody, including me. But it was the 80s and 90s. So, but our brand, it took time, but we became, as a result of James spending time on brand, time on marketing, time talking to the trade press,
Yeah.
banging on that we are the data storage specialists,
Yeah.
constantly. And as a result of that, slowly we were able, plus we were getting a reputation for having the most, I'll call it with a small a, aggressive sales team. We were known for being on the phone, chasing every bit of business,
Yeah.
being driven by Kevin. So it was, we created an entity which was clearly in the right place at the right time for storage manufacturers who were looking, how am I going to service this
Yeah.
new market? It was, a lot of that is sheer luck, I suspect, in terms of timing, but the focus on brand and the focus on trying to do things right and the focus on really good selling, that, James and Kevin at their very best.
Terrific. I think very sensible to say that luck has a part in these things, but Phil commented in the lecture yesterday, someone who had said that the harder you work, the luckier you got. And
Yeah.
it sounds like a lot of this came from the effort of James in particular. He saw that wave coming,
Yeah.
you put the team together to be ready to ride the wave, and then off you went.
Yeah.
So once that had happened, then so the company's now making money, you've gone from some 7 million or whatever, you begin to grow and to expand. For that, did you need to have funding above and beyond revenue?
Well, we started off basically with money invested by this Austrian count guy.
Yeah.
And that that lasted us, but it was not enough. Because although we were turning over a lot of money, we weren't making any money. We couldn't get any banking facilities or whatever. And so that's where we then came up with this thing, our sort of mantra, our cash flow mantra, which was, which I said earlier today, which is that stock, the number of days stock you have and the number of days debtors you are owed should, when added together, need to be less than the days you get from your supplier. And that became our mantra. And what we then did, so we couldn't yet get access to bank finance. So because we're too young, we weren't. I think you have to have something like a 5-year trading record before invoice discounting would touch you in the UK at that time.
Yeah.
So we were still short. So we came up with this idea that we were beginning to get credit from suppliers, but a lot of them were squeezing us on 30 days.
Right.
So Conrad very, very politely, so good guy, said that he would provide guarantees if needed. Well, he said he didn't have more cash available for us at the moment, but he could give us guarantees. So if we were able to negotiate 30 to 45 days out of the supplier, we would go to them and say, thank you very much for that, but I tell you what, give us 70 days, right? And we'll give you a guarantee for that for the amount of increased risk you were taking for that period. Because from their perspective, they're taking no more risk, and secondly, we're going to give them as much business as we possibly can, and thirdly, it's going to put us in a better financial situation, so it's in their interest in any case. And that unlocked us to becoming, we did that in 2 or 3 major suppliers, and all of a sudden we started generating cash. And I think it is fair to say we were the only distributor in the United Kingdom who generated cash every year, because of this. It became this whole attitude to cash flow became part of our corporate culture. And it is one point to say about corporate cultures. They are incredibly important, I believe. Everyone's got to know what your business stands for, how it operates. But there's no point whatsoever coming up with something that someone in the marketing department says what you stand for, if everybody who works with you knows that's just a load of baloney, as we said. I could use a different word. But everybody knew that cash was absolutely incredibly important. So the people in charge of buying, 50% of their payroll every month was not only how much margin we're making out of their profit, but how quickly we were turning the stock around. The salespeople, they got paid only commission, no basic, and they were the highest paid sales team in the industry. They earned significantly more than the directors of the business, but a salesman would lose commission if someone didn't pay us with defined credit terms. So that was called con-claw. We clawed back the whatever. The people chasing the money, the credit control department, they were on 50 significant percentage of the take home. It became a self-fulfilling corporate culture, which meant that it just kept on building, and we kept on making more cash in the bank.
So the key point here then perhaps is that the culture of the company was driven by cash flow management very carefully, making sure that people paid you on time, making sure that you got the longest time to pay, making sure that commission was given, so salespeople shared in the success in a generous way that made them even paid more than the directors, etc. And we're talking then about a very clear decision amongst the founders. We are not going to be in a position where we are unable to pay our liabilities. Because we've tested almost getting close to that in years 1, 2, 3. Don't like it, need to make money, so we need some rules. And by just turning that around slightly, off the company goes now.
Yes.
And you found you've got money coming in, which would give you access because the profit allows you to take out bank finances, things like that. But now you're engaging with the manufacturers, and you're now being seen as the go-to company to distribute for them.
Yeah.
So entrepreneurship isn't about inventing necessarily the product or the service, it's about finding the market for it and knowing how to put the things together. There's a bit of, you're taking things and putting it together in a model that you've created.
Yeah, I love doing things differently. I hate doing something and the only justification for doing it is because that's the way it's always been done.
Right.
And I think James Carey and the same. Again, it was but entrepreneurialism is saying I can do something slightly different, and that doesn't mean say I'm going to sell something different. It could be I'm going to sell in a different way.
Yeah.
It can be I'm going to include more things in this. I mean, one of the things, which is one of my big bugbears, is you don't go and buy a motor car anymore. What you do is you go and buy a finance package.
Yes.
The fact there's a motor car involved is almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
The decision as to what car you're buying is based around the financial package. And actually what the motor industry has done is effectively said, well, actually what we do is we sell finance packages.
Yeah.
And so that to me is the state of mind, is to try and find just something different, which in itself sometimes people don't know is different.
Yeah.
But you know, actually they really like that. That doesn't mean to say they know why they really like
Yes,
it.
yes.
And sometimes it's best not to tell them why, because that way you protecting yourself from your competitors.
So it's about the benefits and the perception that customers have of those benefits.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's terribly important. So, having now found the way to do it by figuring that out as you went along, what was the next thing you thought about? Was it, we'll just keep doing this forever? Or was there an aspiration to have some kind of end point, some kind of target?
Well, it was absolutely clear. Our major investor, Conrad, at some time wanted to make some money out of this. He owned, between the four of us, we owned the majority of the business, well actually 100% of the business, of which he probably had 40%, and then James 20, etc. And so all we were doing, we had our heads down and we were growing the business. And then, without really much idea how we were ever, we just wanted to keep growing every year. But Conrad, because he wasn't involved exactly in the business, he had an absolute clear goal in his mind, which is at the right time I want to make money out of my shares in this business. So one day he said, I want you to, we need to talk with these people in the city. And we presented to them, and they said to us, we think you can float on the London Stock Exchange, which no one was more surprised they said that than me, because I thought, you've got to be kidding. So that was in 1994.
Okay.
At the time, we would, in 94, I think we did something like 47 million revenue, and we're due to do around 4 million profit.
Right.
So this was a whole new world for me, because all of us, by that time, I was effectively, money and ops.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, we have to do a flotation. And that was a really, really weird experience. And it took 6 months, and it is a long, hard slog, and there's a huge amount of paperwork. You have to do an awful lot of going to meetings and meeting people and presenting the company. and it's a whole new world. But then at the end of it, we ended up being floated. Interesting enough, we didn't float in order to raise money. We had, I think, by then £12 million in the bank. So we were not floating to raise money. We floated because we wanted to create a market for the shares so that people could buy and sell the shares. The other point I would make is that prior to that, we had introduced a share scheme for key employees. And we wanted to create a market for those shares as well, so that they would have an opportunity, to make money for all their hard work. So that, in terms of when you're starting a business, my advice to a lot of people is you've got to focus on getting a viable business. That doesn't mean to say it's making money, but it's got to have a very believable business model in it. And that's got to be your focus. If all you're trying to do is start a business because you want to sell it as quickly as possible, the chances are that you won't create something which someone wants to buy. And I've seen lots of those.
So a lot of effort about setting the stage for the flotation, where for those of the students who haven't yet covered this part of the course, that means that people like Conrad could sell shares on the open market so you could get some money back. You're not necessarily issuing new shares to raise finance because you had 12 million in the bank at that time. But other more junior members of staff had been issued share options, which at a point in time like this, they can then exercise the option and they have a right to buy that share option at a price set sometime in the past and then sell it at today's price, and so they make a profit.
Well, the share scheme we did before we floated was slightly different to that.
Okay.
But then as soon as you go public, you want to incentivise the future as well.
Yes, yes.
So you introduce at that point in time share option scheme.
Okay.
And one of the benefits about being public is that you open the newspaper and you see what the share price is. So it makes the valuations of these things a lot more easy. So we've always found that this incentive, ensuring that the key people in the organisation have common aims with what you as a company are trying to achieve, is critical, and that's why the generous issuance of share options to people and share schemes for people who work with you, I think, is a really important thing.
So you're wanting to help people who work in your company for you sharing the success.
Correct.
So it's all part of a culture where you are focused, like-minded vision, and so forth.
Yes.
And so one of the things that's really interesting, we still haven't talked about the products, and we don't really need to do, because the interesting bit is about how do you do business, how do you do this and build it. So just moving slightly further forward then, we get to the point where you've now floated. What's next for the company and for you as you say, keep building and building and building, but what did you see as the next step?
Once you get external investors into a business, be it either private equity or if you're a publicly floated company, you must not underestimate the amount of time and effort it is in terms of communication and meeting their information requirements. So, for a while you're just getting, after the flotation, you are just getting to learn how much time you have to spend on shareholder management and investor management. Really, you are under intense pressure and expectation from shareholders to constantly see the share pricing going up. And towards the end of the 90s, it was becoming very, very obvious to us that margins in what we were doing were going to become increasingly difficult.
Yeah.
It was more and more commodity. Gross margins, when back in the early 90s, we were averaging 13-14% gross margin just as a distributor, which was double anybody else. Some of our competitors were operating on 2% gross margin towards the end of the 90s.
Right.
So we actually thought we need to do something different, because this is just the behemoth just turning over money. And by 1999, I think our annual revenue was, I don't know, 600 million or something. We were making less money than we were, just about the same amount of net profit as we were when we were doing 90 million. You know, it was so. Our market capitalization then was only around 35-40 million, and really what we thought was, because we had been developing and spending time and effort using the internet in the early stages when it first appeared, that's when we, for information and providing information to our customers and product information, it was clear that certain of the businesses that we had within the group by then, which were focusing more on internet activities, were going to have far greater value. So what we did was we renamed the group, because Ideal was too much linked just to data storage products. We renamed it Interex, and within therefore this group we had a business doing a huge amount of revenue, and we had a web-based product information company, IT product information company, and we had 1/3 of a software, a little startup software company which had created its own web publishing technology.
Right.
And then the question was, how are we going to reorganize ourselves in order to get great clarity as to the then market perception of the value of these tiny subsidiaries doing nothing over this big behemoth. And again, when it comes to public companies, all your shareholders are interested in is the share price and the liquidity of the shares. You can go and give them a lovely presentation and talk about changing the world for good. All they're worried about is what's the share price, what's the impact on the share price. So you can get sucked into this thing that you forget what you're doing is really the business ceases to be buying and selling products and services. It becomes investor management, and what am I going to do with the equity?
Yeah. So how long did it take you to sort of say, all right, we need to go in a different direction, we're going to do different things, and then how long did you spend doing that before achieving that?
I think it was in 1998, I think, that we said we need to re-engineer this. And then really it started, the machinations that entailed kicked off at the end of 1999 and into 2000.
Right. And then, having decided what you wanted to do, how long did it then take to execute that? And essentially to sell the company?
Well, it took 9 months to sell the distribution business, that was to an American distributor, and that took 9 months to do. And then what we then did, we sold the distribution business, which was doing, as I said, 600 million a year. And we then used the listed vehicle, Interex, to raise more money. This is in early 2000,
Yep.
which we were going to use to buy the bit of this internet software business that we didn't own. Being completely candid and open, it was the craziest roller coaster ride the world has ever seen. To put it simply, we announced that we were selling the only thing that was making money. We were going to, we were raising 50 million to spend on something that had not made any money yet, which was this software. And the share price, the market capitalization of the business went from, 45, 50 million pounds to 700 million. It's an embarrassing thing to say, because you go, I'm not that clever, I'm not that good. Why is that? We're just trying to do what we think is right, because we think this software might have a real benefit in the world. But the market, that people ask your opinion, what do you think of the share price? If I was ever to say this is vastly overvalued, I'd get fired, because I'm not allowed to say that. Because the shareholders won't like these things, because there are a lot of shareholders who've got shares of £2-3 a share who are now selling out, and then we've completed that, and in the space of sold the distribution business, and in the space of 4 weeks, sometime in 2000, the dot-com bubble failed. The share price went like that, and hubris, and a very, it's a good strengthening experience as to what life can throw at you. And then we ended up selling that business to a financial services software company.
Right.
So for not much money. So it's and interesting enough, the distribution business, which we sold to the Americans, they then got bought by another American. It is still going. Right. Somewhere in England there are still bits that are still that.
Right.
But there you go.
And then moving on from that to the next slide, with funds that you generated then, rather than just saying, okay, I've done that, and at your own admission, it was a heck of a roller coaster ride. Many people would have just said, you know what, I'm just going to chill out now, maybe forever. And you didn't. You said, look, I'm going to look for other opportunities. Was it because you wanted to do more with the funds, or just how? Well, my question is, just how addictive is this?
Well, you don't really stop, and it's very difficult to stop. B, it is very difficult to take money out of businesses.
Yeah.
If you own shares and you are a director of a public company, every time you sell, that's a notifiable event. It's very difficult. So although on paper, sometimes someone says, "My God, you got these shares; it must be worth this." You don't, because it's terribly, terribly difficult. If you are planning to sell a company that you've created, it is one of the benefits of having a team and having a really good secondary team is who's ever buying the business can see that there is a plan moving forward if you are not there. They can also see that the business is not solely dependent upon you as an individual, which is really important, because A, it increases the value of the business if it's not dependent upon an individual, but B, it means that you've got more chance of getting out and getting the fruits of all your hard-earned money out of that business.
Yeah.
Because you're not seen to be critical to the ongoing business. So ensuring that there is a succession plan and ensuring that it's not just you gives you an option to get out if that's what you want to do.
So you've got to define not only a way of building a business that creates value for you, but a way of accessing that value. And that means training up people to follow behind you, so there's continuity and so on. And that's really, it sounds like quite an exciting thing. Having now gone through that process, you then ultimately, I'm turning now towards what is now examinetics, but you then looked across the US for other opportunities that you might become involved with. Did you have any sense of what you were looking for, or was it just having a nose to find things that you felt could be re-engineered?
I'd like to say it was all created and well thought through. We during the dot-com era, we had made an investment in a startup dot-com life sciences business in the UK, and it was just an investment. And that, as dot-com and whatever failed, that failed. So, and I went through the company's books, and they owned 57% of a company in America which was doing a thing called occupational health. In reality, what I should have done is stopped and said, do you really want to do this? Take a breath and say, or whatever. But I didn't, we didn't. It looked like an opportunity, and there were lots of reasons why it appealed. Again, it was a business to business, which I prefer to dealing with consumers. It's providing services, the vast majority of which are mandated by law in America. So I ended up in 2002 going over there, spending some time, and it was a conglomerate of lots of businesses doing lots of things, and there was one part in it which, so we decided to take that part. We bought, that was based in Kansas City, which was effectively providing hearing conservation, testing hearing of people in noisy production lines. Had a fleet of about 30 mobile testing units, annual revenue of $8 million a year. We bought the number, there was another division of another company based in San Diego, in California, right on the coast, in the sunshine. So we put the two together to create Examinetics, and to my eternal credit, we based it in Kansas City and not San Diego in California, but I have no idea why, because San Diego is so much nicer.
So you saw an opportunity, you put some things together, and then I guess the feeling was, let's try and do what we've done previously, figure out how this business needs to go, and you commented in the summary of notes that you sent people that things had been slow because the attitude to accessing finance was different, there was a number of issues. So what was the summary of that for the period?
Summary number one, I didn't do enough research. I relied too much upon, I didn't question enough to get to real detailed understanding of the cash flow of the business.
Right.
I intimately knew after years of the computer one, because you look, this one I looked at, but I didn't really challenge it enough. And the fact of the matter is, it was and is a heavily capital intensive business model, and unfortunately you can't just trade out of it, because there's only so much utilization you can get out of one truck.
Yeah.
I mean, today we have about 120 trucks, and so it is incredibly intensive, and so you then get this is my message associated with this is we started off putting money in by equity. We added on, we got very large, because the business had been going, bits of it had been going for years before we put them in a new vehicle, we were able with personal guarantees to get bank financing.
Yeah.
And we could finance the assets, what Phil was talking about earlier today. So we could get cash that way. And then the question is, to do the quantum leap, that required to do something bigger. And the problem you have is to do with valuation. Because although strategically you can talk about this is really, really important, when you talk with private equity companies, they have their own equations that they come along and they put your model onto that equation. So because it's capital intensive, they're going to pay less for every pound or euro of profit than they would do if it's not capital intensive. And then we got in, so we were constantly in a struggle to get the money to grow the business, to get the profit high enough in order to be able to do a transaction to finance the business so we can get more money to grow at a price that was acceptable to the shareholders without them being completely diluted. And that is why I have been involved in this business for, excuse me, 20 years now, for all intents and purposes. And because it has been a constant balancing act of not having access to the capital at the price we could afford it from a shareholder perspective. And it wasn't helped by the bank collapse, crises of 2008 to 2012, when lending restrictions, raising any money became really difficult, and there was a recession in the United States. But amazing, but we got to the stage in 2018 that we got to a certain level of profitability, which meant that we could then do a venture capital transaction at a price which was in the shareholders' interest. And we viewed this transaction as a stepping stone to another event sometime in the future, which will be where we realise the value of our equity. And I'm very confident that the next one, which will either be a sale, it's unlikely to be a listing in America, because America's stock markets require much bigger organisations. It's likely to be a sale. But it's venture capital money. If you get the right venture capital company, it's great. It's expensive. The contracts are horrendous. If ever you do that, have a lawyer do your contracts for you, but you've got to understand everything in them, because you will understand the significance of why they put certain provisions in those clauses. Your lawyer will not. Your accountant will not, because they're specifically in there back in the appendices, whatever. And what you don't want to do is breach a covenant, as it's called, so that they then take over the company. And we've been very lucky, I have to say. We found a venture capital company and they've been fantastic. So a lot of people have bad horror stories about venture capital. I was told years ago by someone that if your bank manager has a problem with you, it's probably because he has every reason to have a problem with you. And so it's the same with venture capital companies. Good venture capital companies, they are hard, they negotiate really hard, but they are in it to make money, and they're also, most of them are in it to make money with the company being a success. And they love having people stand up and say, I work with this venture capital company, they are fantastic, and look how successful we've been. So never forget that you are part of their marketing strategy.
Yes. Incredible. Well, I think a really interesting talk, Simon. Thank you. I think looking through what you've said, it was a lot less about the technology per se than perhaps people might have imagined. It was very much about the management team that worked together, the quality of the team, complementary skills, etc. About finding a way to access finance at the right price. Odd thing to say, but a euro isn't a euro. It's got to be got at the right price to make it worthwhile, acceptable to all the owners and the shareholders, and then use that to drive it forward and get to where you want it. But growing it from 3 friends up to 700 million, I mean, it's not bad. You know, try better next time. But joking apart, quite seriously, this takes work. What time did you used to get up in the morning to go to work?
5:30, 6 o'clock every morning, and
so this is
7 days a week.
Yeah, this is
Or
hard
later.
work. I mean,
but the comradeship and the enjoyment out of it is. But you do get, being blunt, I'm 62 now. I'm now non-exec at last at Examinetics, and I honestly, if anybody came to me and said, I've got a really good idea, do you want to get involved? I just shoot them. Because I know I don't have the energy that you need to make it a success. It has to be, it cannot be a hobby, because it is, if you're the responsibility, I always found the responsibility of employing people, you are responsible for them, and so you can't, the people who are the least able of taking time off and enjoying themselves are the people at the top, because if somebody else wants to have that week off, you've got to make room for them to have the week off. All of those sort of things are critical, and it is exhausting.
yeah.
But it is unbelievably fulfilling. And my sorry, my final comment is, don't make the mistake I made of never taking a step and looking at what you've achieved. Otherwise, all you do is you see it through other people's eyes. And actually, I remember when Ideal, one of the things we used our money at Ideal was to build a huge distribution centre. And a friend of mine came and said, gosh, look what's been achieved, you must be very proud. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever even thought about it, which is sad really, because if it's consuming your life 24/7, you ought to take time to think about it.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a break for tea and think about it, come back and ask some questions, but I'd like us all to thank Simon for an incredible talk.